In this video, we're going to talk about technology integration and the 4Cs. And to get started, we're just going to go over how do we make technology integration work. And there's really three components that we have to really pay attention to when we try to use technologies in the classroom. The first thing is, what content are you teaching, right? This may be, something about math, science, social studies, whatever it might be, right? It's the content that students are expected to learn in our classrooms. And then you have to think about, well, how am I going to teach it? Right, that's the second part, all these teaching strategies that we might use, formative assessment strategies we might use. And then you think about what type of technologies do I actually have access to in my school, which now that we are in the middle of a pandemic, a lot of schools have invested heavily in providing students their own device. So there's actually probably a lot of technology access in many of your schools. So let's break this down one by one. So the content, easy way to get started with the content if you're unsure where to start once you have your topic. Look at your content standards. Those are usually pretty useful in determining what it is that students are supposed to know by the end of a grade level in a subject. They're written by experts. They're pretty easy to follow for the most part. So you just pick out which ones you want to focus on in a particular lesson. You could look at your textbook or other curricular resources that you might have. It could be things off the internet, what have you, and you get an idea of what it is that you want your students to know and be able to do at the end of the lesson, right? And then you write that learning objective. That's typically measurable, right? You want to be able to say that you can observe this happening, right? That at the end of this lesson, students will know and be able to do X, whatever X is, and you can assess it and say, yep, they can do it, or nope, they can't do it, right? And sometimes we write those as I can statements to make it a little more student-friendly. Okay, so that's the content piece, right? Pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything new or surprising here. The next piece is really the teaching strategies. What do we want this lesson to look like, right? How is it going to start? How is it going to end? And what's everything in between look like, right? So we're looking again at that, like start to finish, what does this lesson look like? And a lot of times we use a gradual release model, right? We do kind of that I do, you do, we do, where, you'll model something, then you have the students maybe do it as pairs, or you do it together as a class, what have you, and then you turn it over to the students to do independent practice, right? That works really well. You typically do a lot of modeling for students in the classroom, and then you fill in with other teaching strategies, and those could be very teacher-centered, right? Things like direct instruction, lecturing, whole class discussion, whole group instruction, whatever it might be, right? Or it could be student-centered, right? And there might be things like doing projects, small group work, that kind of stuff. Okay, so you have your teaching strategies. That's kind of part two. And then the third aspect here, you have the technologies, and you really have to consider, well, what do I have access to? Right? What kind of technologies are in my school, in my classroom? What am I comfortable using? Because let's be honest, we're not all comfortable with the same types of technologies. So you have to think about, well, what am I confident in? Because if you're not confident in something, then you might not want to use that, at least maybe to start out with. And then you have to think about, well, how can the technology, whatever technology I choose, support my learning objective? Because that's really the goal here, right? You want to use that technology in some way that actually pushes your lesson forward, right? It shouldn't just be an add-on or a tack-on at the end of the lesson. It should be something that actually helps you and your students, achieve greater success in the classroom. Now, what I typically advocate for is the use of authentic uses of technology, right? And that's where we're using technology like we would in the real world. Right? So if you're going to have students do some research, let them research on a laptop or a tablet or something like that. If they're going to make some pictures or something like that, let them take some pictures of whatever the phenomenon is that they're going to be exploring in real life, right? There's all kinds of ways we can use technologies, and I think the best way is to use it modeled off of what we would do, as adults in the real world. I think what we tend to look for more often, however, are those single technology solutions that will solve our problems. And kind of a spoiler alert here, there really aren't those single technology solutions that really work in all situations, right? We may have these apps that work really well, but sometimes the problem is these apps can be disconnected from what it actually looks like to do that task in the real world. Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit more once we get to campus. We'll talk about that in a little bit more depth, okay? So as we put this all together, it's really easy to combine it. You go ahead and you set your instructional goal, you explore those available technologies that are around you, and then you choose the best one that would support your instructional goal. Right? That's what you're really looking for. Putting these together, these lessons together that use technologies don't have to be a lot of work, but you have to really think about what is it that you want your students to learn, and then you go from there, right? You think about, okay, well, this is what my end goal is. How can I pick the right strategies and the right technologies to support that, okay? Now, as you get into figuring out, well, what kind of lessons do I want to teach, it's important to understand that not all technology-rich lessons are equal. right? We have lessons that are very student-centered and lessons that are very teacher-centered. And really what we are focusing on here is the type of engagement that we're going to have in the classroom from our students, right? So if we're doing something teacher-centered, so I might be teaching a lesson, maybe I'm using a PowerPoint and I'm lecturing or leading a whole group discussion using, PowerPoint. Right, that's going to be very passive engagement for most students in the classroom, right? Students might, speak up a little bit. If, they're talking, that might be a little bit more active engagement for them. But as a whole class, generally speaking, that's pretty passive. Now, at the opposite end of that spectrum might be something where you're using something called a makey-makey in your computer to do some kind of coding or some interaction with the computer. And that's very student-centered, right? That's very students they've got hands-on interactions with the technology. They're kind of driving their own learning. And, it's quite a bit different when we think about engagement, right? They're highly engaged versus, just sitting there. And you can even look at these two pictures and see the differences in the engagement. You have the people in the classroom up in the upper left that are sitting there. Then you have the girl that's all pushing on the bananas and making her computer make music and things like that. So there's a lot of differences between there. And there's, a million different shades of gray in between here, okay? And something that can help us get to more of the student-centered active engagement, which is really what I advocate for in your lessons, especially at the elementary level. We want kids to be up because they're already very energetic, very excited to be in school for the most part, right? So let's use that to our advantage in our lessons. So let's design these student-centered lessons. And the way I encourage you to do that is using the 4 C's. Okay, so we have creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. These are going to be things that you read about out of our book and some of the resources I have in D2L this week, or I guess for this unit, which brings us to our unit to-do list. So our unit goes from September 14th to October 11th, and we have a number of things for you to do. So we have readings videos on the 4 C's. We have the Smith Budai, I think is how you say the author's name, but you're going to read pages 1 through 46, which is really all of the content in that book that is going to be required. So basically reading that real skinny little book. We're going to read all of that. I have put some PowerPoint slides together. Now, typically, if this was going to be a face-to-face only class, we didn't have this kind of blended component. I would just lecture on all that content. But I didn't make a video for it because I thought, you can just read the slides and get the same effect. You don't need me to read them to you. So you can go ahead and read through those slides, and I have a few other things for you in D2L to kind of go through as well. I think there's a video and maybe a couple other readings in there. So go ahead and look at those as well. And really our goal here is for you to explore and implement teaching strategies and technologies that support 2 of the 4 C's. Okay, now the reason that that's our goal is because that's what you're going to do when we get to this assignment called the 4 C's teaching event, right? You're going to plan a lesson, you're going to teach that lesson, and you're going to video record that lesson, and you're going to demonstrate in that lesson that you can engage students using technology in 2 of the 4 C's. Okay, and if you are teaching remotely, you're going to do the same thing, but you'll provide different type of evidence, and we can talk about that if you go ahead and email me if you are in that situation. But that's what our kind of goal here is. We want to see you actually teaching with technology so we can get you some feedback and help you improve and become a greater teacher than you already are. Okay. And then the other thing on the screen here that we have to do for this unit is our formative assessment. We're going to have that due on October 1st. And it's just another one of those quick little Flipgrid activities that take you just a minute to do online through Flipgrid. Okay? So if you have any questions, you need to let me know. Go ahead, shoot me an email. Otherwise, I will see you online. Then I will see you face to face.